We're going to do the wrap now, and so the first thing we do is just get the paper closer to size, and we can either do measurements or we can just sort of roll it out using the actual box. So we want to give ourselves a little bit of extra space on the side here because we're going to have flaps that flap into the box itself. So we set it on its side, roll it down, go to the left, and we can look and see. We want to give ourselves a little bit of space for a flap on the side too, so we're going to give ourselves about 3/4 of an inch, 3 centimeters. And then we'll roll it in the opposite direction so we get that size there. And finally we'll test the full length. And we have to include our lid as well and give ourselves another inch or so extra on either side. And I'm really just cutting the paper down so that it actually is easier to work with. But you don't have to do this, but I find it helpful. So we'll trim on the sides and the top. Do a quick cut here. Move the top third of the paper. Save that for later. And do the same thing on the end if you want. Or you can just forge ahead. So we'll begin by centering the box, and we're going to start with a first fold on the for the box bottom. So again, we want to square it up with the edge, and so I'm giving myself 3/4 of an inch or so, 3 centimeters about, to make sure it's square. So I'm marking it, and then I'm going to align this. I'm going to mark the back edge of the box, and that's where my first score line is going to be. So that's marked. So I've got two sort of parallel marks. Line up my ruler, get my scoring tool out. And the other thing I want to do is mark where the score line is going to stop, because the score line is for the lid is going to be in a different position than the score line for the bottom. And so I'm just going to carefully measure that out. And so now this is the side the lid is going to hinge off of. So I'm just going to mark it. And now I'll get my scoring tool. And I'll score right up to the point where I marked. Okay, so next thing I want to do is cut the first edge of the flap that's going to run along the long side, so that I can fold this up. So I've got my triangle. I'm just going to square it up. I'm going to do a quick cut. And now I'm ready to score again. we're going to fold it. Okay, so now we have a fold, and this will sort of serve as the foundation registration for the rest of the build. So now I've got my box. I'm gonna flip it around, line it up at the corner. Make sure it's nice and tight at the bottom. Then I'm going to mark it for the next fold. So now that it's marked, I can score it, and then I can cut it like I did the first side so that I can fold up the second long side flap. So I'm scoring, and I marked right at the end so I could line up the ruler, so I'll line up the ruler with the first cut and then the pencil mark it for the end of the box, and that should give me a perpendicular cut. So I've got the second cut, I can fold this over. So now I have the bottom all set up. So the next step is to do the score for the two shorter sides. So in the score basically aligns with the two cuts. It can be a little bit proud of it so that the cuts sit back a little. That's up to you if you want to do that. So, and I also want to mark this and just sort of give a key. So I'm putting an A on the side of this, and I'll put an A on the paper as well. That way, because it's a rectangle, I could get the paper flipped around, and there may be just some minor deviations with the cardboard box in terms of its square or its height. In this way, you always know you're putting the paper on the right way. So I'm marking the end so that I can then cut where the two flaps will come up, and also score for the fold up the short side. So the first thing I'll do is make the cuts. So there we go. Now we have the two long side flaps are in place. The next step is I'm going to set up for the tabs. So I'm going to cut 45s from the corner where the first cut meets to set up the tab. That way the two ends won't interfere with each other when you're folding it together. So I'll cut the two 45s on both sides. Now I'm just going to eyeball sort of a parallel line but to the fold, but maybe about 3/8 to half an inch, 2 centimeters. We'll cut a straight line, do the same thing on the other side. And you can see this is overly long right now. We're going to trim it down and sort of create the flap that folds into the inside of the box to have a finished edge. So we got both sides done. So now the next step is to fit the box in. Fold the sides up to make sure it's centered. Make sure it's nice and tight against the end. So So the three folded pieces are nice and tight, and then we'll create our fourth fold. We also made sure that the A on the box and the A on the paper are oriented properly. And I'm just going to use my plastic triangle to sort of tighten up this fold so it's nice and clean. Burnish it down, the back of my nail. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. It's nice and tight. And again, always just testing. So you can see here, got the tabs folded in, got the paper lined up, and you can see the paper is running right to the edge. If you want, you can cut the paper of the non-tab sides a little bit shorter, just so it doesn't hang out and possibly catch. Okay, so I'm making sure this is all nice and squared up because we're going to start trimming this next piece. So we're going to trim for the flap to go inside. So we have to do a couple special cuts here. We've got these little corners that are going to wrap around sort of the raised sides where the lid sets in. So I'm just cutting a parallel cut to the side of the board. And now I'm going to cut to the top. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Again, making sure it's tight. So now we're just putting a 45 cut on the flap, matches the cut we put on the lower portion of the flap. Then we'll do the same thing on the other side. So now we'll test the fit again. So the fit is pretty good. Now what we're going to have to do is actually trim these sides off because we want the remaining stretch of the paper here to actually fold into the box. So we basically have to cut it so that it sits just inside of the two side walls. So then I've got that cut, which acts as the guide for how deep this flap should be. And so I'm just using that as a guide, and again eyeballing it. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Again, just making sure that this is parallel to the fold that's already been created. And I'm not too concerned about how long this flap is. It just needs to be long enough to sit below the insert that I'm going to create for inside the box to hold the object. So I'm folding this in and doing the first crease around the top edge, burnish that, make sure it's a nice clean fold, make sure the paper is nice and tight. Then I'm going to do the second fold, pull it nice and tight, so you're doing a lot of pulling down, giving it downward pressure. And you can see this is too long, so I need to trim it down so that it will actually sit flat against the inside wall. So I'm folding it down now. Okay, so this is great. now that we've got that all set, the next step So I marked the all the edges, the top edge and the inside corners. And now I'm going to basically do the cuts for the tabs. Do that side. I'll go and do the other side. And again, I'm always making sure that the wrap is nice and secure around the box. I'll do this cut as well. So when I did a mark for the fold, I'm going to cut the tabs. And I'm just lining up the ruler so it's parallel, and it's kind of matching the thickness of the other tabs, because the tabs do telegraph a little bit on the paper below. Cut the second tab. And now I'm just going to cut the 45s. Again, just eyeballing it. If you want to, you can use the square that I have over there, but the triangle, but I don't think it's necessary. There you go. Okay, so those flaps are ready. So now we can take this and fold, again, dry fold it back into place. Sides are coming up. And so what I want to do is because the next set of procedures is going to be working with the two long walls and sort of wrapping over the edges, is I just want to secure these two flaps into place. So this is nice and secure now with just some white artist tape or blue tape. So I'm just going to fold these tabs in on the side. So again, making sure everything is square and tight, because things can slip around a little bit. And so I'm holding the box firmly on the table with my left hand, and I'm going to use this knife to just lift up the flap enough that I can get under it to fold it up. And I'm just going to pull it up and fold it tightly with my hand to get the initial break, and then I'm just going to use the plastic triangle to sort of flatten it down. And then I can use a piece of artist tape to secure it in place. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Folding it over. And you can see there's a bunch of different ways to do these folds. You know, I felt comfortable doing this fold from the top this time because three of the four corners have been folded over, so it's very secure and in place at this point. So I'm just going to put a piece of tape on this. So this is nice and tight, and now we can get to work on the two long flaps. So maybe I'll just tape this flap down. I just want to square this up. Okay, so I'm pulling this up tight. I'm going to do the first fold. I'm keeping upward pressure on the paper so that it's sitting nice and flat against the side of the wall. Basically just get this corner as clean as you possibly can. So the paper is tight to the sidewall, it's tight to the top edge. Now I'm folding it over, and this is going to get a little tricky because of the two ends. So I'm going to need to actually trim this. You can see it's catching on the ends. So I'm going to trim it with the scissors. And this is, again, sort of eyeballing it. So just be careful. You can see I'm going incrementally here, taking a little bit off at a time, because I don't want to, if I cut too far, I can't recover from that. So I'm just going to take it bit by bit. You know, you can also measure and mark this if you want, but I feel like that would take twice as much time. And as long as you go slow and steady, this will work out just fine. So now I can really firm up this fold, the second fold, on the inside edge of the sidewall. And I'm just making sure that they've been completely folded flat, because that way they sit flat. So I'm going to use the back of the this burnish, the scoring tool, to just flatten this out completely. Okay, so I'm just trimming this. Unfortunately, the paper above is in the way, so that's sort of interfering a little bit. But okay, so now these are both ready. You can see I overcut that a little bit. So there's going to be a little gap when the box is done. Hopefully I'll be able to hide that with the interior wrap. Okay, so nice and clean. Okay, now we're going to do the last edge here. So I'm going to do the first edge just like I did last time. Burnish it down. Again, you're always putting a lot of pressure on the paper to get it to sit nice and flush and tight. And I'm burnishing down the center as much as I can. I'm going to get my scissors and trim this so that I have that little notch that clears the adjacent wall. Same thing on the other side. Okay, so that's all good. Probably the one last thing I'm going to do is going to trim this flap that's overly long down so that it matches the other one. And again, I don't have to. I could leave it because it's going to be hidden by an interior wrap. But just so all things are equal, cut that down. And now it's all ready, set for the next stage. Just burnish these down a bit more, make sure they're nice and square and sharp. And so we'll be ready for the next step, which is hinging and wrapping the lid. That's it.